Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with CreativeMind. I'm Debra Maldonado.
I'm Dr. Rob.
And we have a really cool episode today, topic of synchronicity. A lot of people want to have us talk about this. It's a fascinating topic. So we're going to dive in just a minute. But before we begin, I want to remind you to subscribe to our podcast if you're listening to us on the podcast services out there, iTunes, Spotify, all the other great services. We'd love to have you follow us every single week to inspire you to learn more about yourself and hopefully help change others' lives as a coach.
Absolutely.
So let's start with Jung, Carl Jung, the man who coined the term synchronicity.
Yes, around 1930, he came up with this term, synchronicity, which of course means like it has the word chronos in there, which is time, and sync together means like being together simultaneous. And so it's about these events that happen in time that have a connection. But he says they don't have a causal connection that we can see.
Like if you had a party and you were invited, your family, and they all showed up, it wouldn't be synchronicity because the cause was you inviting them, and you can tie it back to a cause.
That's right.
So in simple terms.
So here's a very simple definition. A meaningful coincidence of two or more events where something other than the probability of chance is involved. In other words, if there's a clear definition or kind of instance of probability that something will happen, then we say, well, that's not synchronicity, that's just a coincidence.
It's really where you can't find the cause of either, the common cause, basically.
Yes, but here's the clincher. It's the meaningful coincidence. Now, that means it's a subjective experience of meaning. Not
just a happy accident.
Yeah, not just coincidences, because we see patterns in nature, we see patterns in human activity. I mean, tons of them, essentially.
So what would that be different than luck? How people would say luck. I mean, a synchronistic event could be lucky. Could be. Luck in itself, like I won the lottery. Well, you bought the ticket. There's going to be a winner, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so this phenomena has been debated and continues and will continue to be debated, which is great. We like kind of things that are open to interpretation, because it. From the struggling with these concepts emerges great ideas, great philosophies, great coaching techniques.
And if you've seen that movie, Dangerous Method, it's based on the book by Jung and Freud. There's a scene where Carl Jung, Fassbender, our buddy, he's sitting in Freud's office and he has this feeling, and then the pipes started clinking. And he said, "Oh, did you hear that? That's weird, right?" And then the second time it happened, he goes, "I felt it right before it happened." He said that there's something here, and Freud poo-pooed it, and he was like, "What are you talking about? That you're crazy?" And he's just like, "No." So he was really intrigued by these phenomenon that were unexplainable by science.
Yeah.
But right now, like we were talking before the show, there's this bridge between, like Jung studied with. And learned about the new sciences.
Yeah, he was in constant communication with this guy named Wolfgang Pauli, who was a Nobel Prize winner for physics. And he was into the quantum physics of that time. And so he wasn't a lightweight, he wasn't a new age person. Here was a real hardcore scientist who was collaborating with Jung and helping him develop this idea.
And so what does science have to say about this? And then the other, we were talking about, like, science is great, but it doesn't give us all the answers.
Yeah, I think in the scientific community, there's an extreme point of view where only the materialistic, rationalistic perspective is considered to be a valid way of approaching the world, the universe, to understand it.
So if you can measure it, you can have tests and you can witness it, it's valid. But if you can't measure it, then it's not valid, basically.
Yeah, it's considered beyond the realm of science and kind of ignored. But Jung always insisted that we're missing out on half of reality if we do that. And so he was always trying to find ways to both be an empiricist, and he always insisted he was empirically driven, meaning he was trying to validate these things so that others could use them and replicate them. But he was also interested in larger questions, philosophical questions. He was very much into the I Ching, into studying Eastern philosophy, yoga, alchemy, which points simply at this fact that he was looking at the unconscious mind as a valid source of wisdom and knowledge that we have access to. But
there's much more to us than what we're conscious of.
Yes.
That's driving our results in life, but also driving our destiny in a way, like
That's right.
in a spiritual sense.
The problem with the unconscious mind from the point of view of science is that you can't measure it the way you do the observable universe, and therefore it's thrown out essentially. But Jung said that's a mistake, basically, because what we're doing is we're ignoring half of the equation of being a human being and the psyche. The unconscious is by nature irrational, illogical. It's not going to play by the rules.
And it's not linear, right? It's
not linear, exactly. So it's not going to play by the rules of our waking experience, and therefore it's going to appear very bizarre and weird. But if you take the time and read Jung and his approach to understanding the unconscious, we see there's a methodology that we can use to access that wisdom and that knowledge of the unconscious mind. And certainly synchronicity, we can look at it as one of the keys that we can use to kind of follow a thread into the unconscious processing of the psyche.
So it's not just looking at synchronistic events or looking at something like an example would be you're thinking about someone and they call you and there's no cause, like why would they call at that time, the exact time you're thinking? And then we think, oh, that's kind of cool. But, what do you do with that, right? We're going to talk about that too. Yeah. But I love this idea of unus mundus. I'd like to talk about that.
Unus mundus means one world. And it's getting at non-duality, essentially. And non-duality, now we understand a lot more from the kind of the scholars and the monks that have come over from the East and taught this idea of non-duality. But it was also in the West, although to a much lesser extent. What non-duality means is that we're not looking at two phenomena. It's not the psyche and the world.
The body and the world, yeah.
It's essentially that the world and the psyche are one and the same thing. When we see the world, we're essentially seeing psyche, our mind, our both conscious and unconscious, in how we interpret, perceive, and understand the world. And
then Jung, this is different than the subconscious that Freud would talk about. When we talk about the unconscious, there's a personal unconscious, which is reflecting our patterns. So those are kind of most common in personal growth. But the collective unconscious is something uniquely Jungian. And it is just amazing because when you see the world, you're actually seeing more collective expressions, like we're connected to something much deeper than our personal history and our personal experience. We come with this collective unconscious, and we're all part of it. And that when we see these events in the world that seeming very unrelated to our everyday life, but we're seeing ourselves. We're a part of ourselves is in everything.
Absolutely.
And that's a scary thing for some people to accept. It's easier to say I'm a good person and I don't, cause wars or famine or terrible things to happen. And but it's easy to accept the good in the world and the good things. But that's really the kicker is that we're seeing everything's connected.
Yeah,
There's one mind and matter. There's no distinction.
That's right. What we call consciousness and matter are not really two separate phenomena. They're one. It's one world, one consciousness, and this is for those of you interested in non-dual philosophy, Adi Shankara is the primary philosopher that you can't go wrong with reading his work. So he was on the right track. Jung was on the right track in looking at quantum physics and mechanics as a way to verify his ideas, his theory of this acausal connection and the observer. And in the observer, we're here in the psychological sense, we're talking about meaning. In other words, what is the common connecting element between these events that appear to happen not by chance, but really by some kind of synchronicity, some kind of entanglement. It's the sense that we have a meaning ascribed to it, that there it hits a certain passion, emotion, meaning in us. So a lot of people misunderstand meaning because it appears to be inherent in the external events, right? So if we have a child, or we have a family, we have a job, it's all meaningful to us, and we think, well, those things are bringing the meaning to us. But that's a misperception. Our mind is the one that imbues and gives meaning to those experiences. In other words, the meaning is coming from the psyche, not from the external events. And that meaning is what connects the events for us.
And makes them synchronistic.
In other words, we understand now in perception that our mind, in Jung's terms, the psyche, is cherry picking the things in the environment that have a meaningful connection to our assumptions. So this is confirmation bias in essence. And
it's really amazing because personally, when I went to hypnotherapy school, I was planning, which I abandoned pretty early on. I still do it if people need it. But when I was first started and wanted to leave the corporate world, I wanted to be a childbirth hypnotist. Like I was like, I can do that. People are having babies all the time. I'll have plenty of work. Who wouldn't want to have childbirth without pain? So I was, my first day of school, and there's a class of 30 people, and I sat next to this woman, and we were in New Mexico. So I was living in Denver at the time. And I sat next to this woman. I told her I was from Denver, and she was like, "Oh my God, I'm from Denver too." And I said, "Yeah, I think I want to be a childbirth hypnotist." And she looked at me. She's like, "No way. I own a doula company in Denver and Cherry Creek." And I said, "Oh my God, that was a weird, synchronistic event." But then it gets even more synchronistic. And so this is the question I have for you about it. There was a string of events that were synchronistic. And the next thing is I went to actually work with her when I first started, and I met this wonderful, amazing Lainey, who is my dear friend to this day. She's an amazing woman. She's still in Denver. Her and Dee Dee are my buddies. And she was a hypnotherapist too. And we became really good friends. Lainey worked for this company that was a dating service where I actually met you. So it was like a chain, every single point. Like if I didn't sit next to her, I wouldn't have met Lainey. And then Lainey wouldn't have encouraged me to sign up again for the dating thing. And I wouldn't have met you. And you were the first person that responded to my little video, and the only date I ever went on. So it was almost like these synchronistic events were kind of like, almost like a part of my psyche was trying to pull up, make us meet. And it had to bring in all the things. And actually too, I didn't go to that school. I put off going for like a year because I went back to the corporate world. And then I finally went the next year. And so if I was in a different class or all these different things would have occurred. So would they be a string of synchronistic strings of synchronicities.
Easy for you to say.
That actually you can look back at and connect the dots and say, wow, there's a lot of meaning there because there's something beyond my conscious mind that was making those decisions.
Yes, that would be a good way to interpret that. Most people, they make the mistake to think that they're creating in a conscious way. Now, of course, our awareness, our conscious mind, our ego mind, our conceptual mind is playing a role in the things we experience, of course. It's how we perceive the world. But the unconscious mind is much more powerful and is playing a much bigger role than people think. Think of all the assumptions you've collected throughout your life that were essentially interpretations based on your experiences of what you can expect from the world. Like your psyche is essentially learning with every experience, and it's defining who you think you are and what you can expect from the world. Now, those assumptions are unconscious. In other words, we're not calling them up and running through all of them and kind of saying, okay, I'm going to make a decision now to create a relationship or to find a job. They're playing into our destiny, into the way we experience the world and the things we find in life unconsciously.
So synchronicity would bring us basically online, like merging, making us aware of these unconscious kind of assumptions and patterns.
I would say that the things that we see in the world are reflecting those deeper unconscious assumptions about who we are and what's going to happen to us in the world. So the conscious mind, at the conscious level, we might be thinking, like in your situation, you might be thinking, I'm never going to meet somebody.
Yeah,
That's never going to happen. But at the unconscious level, there's a pattern already.
I'm destined to meet someone.
Yeah, there's a collection of ideas, experiences, assumptions that some of those strands might come from your genetics, your epigenetics, your early childhood experiences that you don't even remember. All that weighs into how it plays out.
You know, I love that you say that because so many people, whether it's they want to make more money, they want to find love, they're like, well, consciously, I have to change my conscious mind, right? I have to think positive. I have to believe I want it. But what you're saying is even me being so like it's never going to happen, that unconsciously there was a part of me that believed it. Like for me, I always said, people ask like, wow, you know, how did you ever eventually you make it work? And I said, I never gave up. And so that I think in us, we have this part of us that has that desire and that not wanting to give up on that dream, even if the world isn't showing us that it's there. Like that is like almost like a light inside of us that we can create a synchronistic event like that.
That's right.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
So
I did it without even knowing it.
In practical terms, because we always emphasize practicality because we want to train our coaches to help people with their everyday problems, not just philosophical questions. So in everyday terminology, what we're saying is that the events in your life are reflecting your unconscious patterns that you're not even aware of at the conscious level. So what this means is that you can use your current circumstances, your life, as a mirror. If you want to understand what is in your unconscious mind, look at the patterns in your external circumstances. What is going on? What triggers you? What makes you happy? What have you achieved that you wanted to achieve? What haven't you achieved that you want to achieve? All those things are reflected in your external circumstances. And most importantly, because it's connected to meaning, it's connected to how much you are willing to pay attention to your your inspiration, your desire to create
Emotions
these things.
too, right?
Your emotions, essentially. So emotion, the way it plays into meaning is this way. We can think of emotion, our emotional repertoire is like the color palette, right? We have different range, or a range of emotions that give us a way to color the world, to give it meaning and form.
No one gives us emotion or makes us feel an emotion. The emotion arises by our interpretation of what the situation that we experience. So
Yes.
we have all these emotions in us. It's not like someone made us angry and now we have anger. It's like everyone has anger, and some people activate it and some people don't.
Yeah, and a lot of people kind of misread the emotions because they think there's negative and positive emotions. I mean, that's not really useful, because all emotions are useful to us if we understand what they mean, or what they are, that they are the meaning-making function of the psyche. That's the proper definition of the emotions. They are the meaning-making function of our psyche.
So synchronicity, you have to have a feeling attached to it.
Yeah.
It can't be like a rational, like, oh, that's nice, my mother called the same time I thought of her. It's more like, oh my God, I was just thinking of her and I was worried about her, and then she called and everything's fine. And it was almost like she heard me in a way. And so how do we really use synchronicity? Like, how can people use it with their everyday life?
Yeah, so if we pay attention, especially to our dreams, but
They're also a synchronistic, right? They show up and I was, worried about this, and then I had a dream, and then it told me the answer.
well, often we don't remember, but we've dreamt of certain situations, and therefore when we experience them, we have that deja vu feeling, right? So there's a synchronicity there that we're not paying attention to. So paying attention to the dreams is really important. But what we've noticed is that as people enter the individuation process, or this process of self-actualization, the unconscious begins to give the individual much more vivid dreams that are, one, they act as a kind of heads up as to what's coming up for them, both temporally and both internally in their evolution, in their inner work. So it's essentially giving you a heads up as to what's coming up in your life. And because remember, both the external world and the unconscious mind are one, you're essentially experiencing both your inner work and the changing of your external circumstances. The more you make the unconscious conscious, as Jung says, the more the external circumstances will change. And you can use that as a mirror. Again, when you see the external circumstances change, you know that your psyche is changing. Your unconscious mind is becoming more clear and more conscious.
And so when we talk about individuation, and the first step is the first phase is shadow work. So shadow work is really kind of a synchronistic event, because I know for me, when I'm dealing with something internally and I know that I have to grow in a certain area, someone will no doubtedly show up in my life to help me with that. That it usually comes as a triggering person or a triggering event that is reflecting back and giving me more information of what I need to transcend it, or to move through that barrier that I placed on myself. I find that if you kind of see everything as happening for you, not to you, you are able to start seeing these synchronistic events, and then seeing meaning in everything, seeing meaning in these things that are very unpleasant sometimes, that happen in our life. A lot of times I've heard people talk about synchronicity as a happy thing, right? This happy event, like me meeting you finally, that's a happy synchronicity. But much of the growth that we experience is through these unfortunate events or weird synchronicities. We don't think of them as these, oh, that's synchronicity. Like, it has such a shiny, nice, intuitive word, framing around it. But it really is those kind of troubled people, those accidents, those technical problems, the random person that comes in your life that's interfering with something. Those are all synchronistic events as well, if you're giving them an emotional meaning.
Absolutely. And who has the, let's say, the final call as to what meaning we ascribe to our experiences? We do. But only to the extent that you become conscious of that unconscious content, like you say, the shadow in the unconscious mind. If you are not conscious, if you're not actively enlightening yourself about what is it that I've been programmed with from my past experience, then the mind will simply project the old patterns onto the external appearance of the world, and you will simply see the same stuff over and over again in different variation, of course, because you're still growing and changing, but it will essentially be the same pattern. So that if you're used to, if in your unconscious mind you're saying, I always fail. Things never happen to me in a creative way, or things I never find happiness.
I could never find a person. No one, relationship. I'll never find that relationship.
Now, you might not even be thinking of that consciously, like we say, but if that's the pattern in the unconscious mind, then those are the synchronistic events that you'll see out in the world.
Well, it's almost like, I think that Jung had said this, is that these events that happen in the world are a way to wake us up, or a way to keep reflecting back. Like when we talk about, Freud talked about this too, the repetition compulsion, is that we start to see the same thing. And it's like, when are we going to stop the train? I always think of it as like a veil that we have over us, of the veil of separation, that the ego hides the connection we have to everything. And so it keeps us very limited. And when we have those synchronistic events, it's almost like the divine is piercing through that veil with a little bit of light, showing us that string of the inner and outer, and like hopefully awakening us and opening us up to the greater mysteries. And I do think that happens with people when they have these weird synchronistic events. They say, wow, that was kind of funny, and that's interesting. And it's kind of like our deeper wisdom is making us, pushing us toward that self-actualization. It's like natural for us to become more aware, to take down the veil, to see our potential, to see the connection with everything.
Yeah, and if you haven't or are not experiencing synchronistic events, it's probably because you don't pay attention, and you've probably dismissed them as just coincidences without meaning. So the more meaning you learn to ascribe to things. In other words, Jung talks about entering the symbolic life, this numinous quality that you can start to kind of cultivate and understand that everything has meaning in it if you pay attention. So that if you look at you simply look out the window and you see a beautiful sunset, that has a lot of meaning to it. But the meaning, again, it has to come from you. You have to kind of think about it and pay attention and say, what does this mean for me? And you have to cultivate that sense of meaning. If you don't, then it's the mind has no choice but to just describe the same old pattern again, and all you see is just another sunset, just another day.
Well, I have a great exercise that people can do. They're very simple. I want you to spend time in the morning, at least 5 minutes, sitting with a problem you want to solve. And you set the intention, you meditate on the problem, you just think about the problem, but you're not thinking of it as, oh, I never can solve this, but thinking of, I have this problem and I know there's an answer in there somewhere. So you're keeping it open. The answer's in there somewhere, the answer's in there somewhere. And then throughout the day, I want you to actively and consciously look for the answer in the world. And then your mind is, if you direct your mind, it's trained to look for that connection. And then when you see it, you recognize the synchronicity that, oh, that's weird. I was just meditating. I need an answer to this problem. and then this thing shows up. So like you get a random email, right? So many times our coaches that join our training will say, you know, I was kind of thinking about Jung, I was reading him, and then I went online and then I saw you guys. And I'm so glad I didn't even think about becoming a Jungian coach, but then I saw you and I read your stuff, and then that's how we came together. So it's kind of like that's, it's almost like serendipity too. Like you have that kind of meaningful connection with someone, the synchronicity I had with that girl in the class, to finally lead my path to you. It's trusting that inside of us, there's this wisdom that wants us to solve this problem. And it's not from the personal unconscious. It's not from the patterns that we have, or reprogramming our mind is not going to solve the deeper problem. That within us, there's deeper wisdom that's it's showing us out there, like, hey, you know, I've showed you like all these signs. And I have a funny story, that show with when Jim Carrey, when he was God, or he was mad at God, and he said, "Show me a sign," and there were signs everywhere, but he couldn't see them. I think that was really funny. That's what happens with us.
Yeah. So, just to sum it up, an internal there in the classical definition that Jung gives, there has to be an internal and an external circumstance that match. In other words, you're thinking of someone and the phone rings and they call. There has to be no causal connection. In other words, if you call your friend and leave a message and then the next day he calls, that's a causal connection.
He called
right?
you back.
Yeah, he called you back. You caused it, essentially. And they must be connected in time. In other words, there's a close sequence of events that you can connect it in a chronological time.
So it's not like, 10 years ago, I was thinking of this and this finally happened. Yeah.
When all those three elements come together, then you're having a synchronistic event or experience.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was really fun to explore these wonderful topics that Jung makes us open up to the mystical parts of life, and it makes it very practical. And so we hope that you subscribe before you leave. Make sure you click subscribe so you can make sure you get every episode of Soul Sessions. But thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on another episode.
See you soon.
Take care.